Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we now turn to poem 247, What Would I Give to See His Face? Now, much like poem 246, Forever at His Side to Walk, it isn't completely clear who the his is, although notice 246, it's capitalized his, and in 247, not capitalized. That is to say, who is it we're talking about? Many scholars will point to Sam Boyle's. Is Emily here in this poem having a bit of fun? The hyperbolic language, we're going to obviously talk about all of it. When this poem was first published, it was published in the Atlantic Monthly, March of 1929, and right away there were all kinds of speculation about who is she referencing in a poem like this. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily. I'm hopeful that you've already worked with our preceding set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've already read the preceding 246 poems. We just finished with 246, Forever at His Side to Walk. We just mentioned it. Now, again, this language is extravagant. There's no doubt about it. And some will call it tongue-in-cheek. Some will call it just poetic play that Emily is always about. And of course, if it was sent to Sam Boyles, he probably would have smiled at the kind of exuberance of a set of lines like this. Now, even though this poem was published in 1929, this is a poem that I like to turn to as an exemplar. That when Emily wrote a poem like this, I don't think she ever thought that this poem would be published someday and showcased someday as an example of her poetic enterprise, even though, again, in 29 it was published. And think about, as opposed to our conversations with Walt Whitman, when we did talks with Walt and all the poems of Leaves of Grass, here, in a poem like this, this is, to me, more of a private exchange that then becomes public. And there are people who will see this as a weak poem, but I think Emily is having fun here all the way through this poem. What would I give to see his face? I'd give my life, of course, but that is not enough. Stop, just a minute, let me think. I'd give my biggest bobolink, that makes two, him and life. You know who June is? I'd give her. Roses a day from Zanzibar and lily tubes like wells, bees by the furlong straits of blue, navies of butterflies sail through and dappled cowslip dells. Then I have shares in primrose banks, daffodil dowries, spicy stalks, dominions broad as dew, bags of doublons, adventurous bees brought me from firmamental seas, and purple from Peru. Now, have I brought it? Shylock, say, sign me the bond I vow to pay to her who pledges this, 1 hour of her sovereign's face, ecstatic contract, Negard's grace, my kingdom's worth of bliss. Now, this poem is fascinating to me because it does start out kind of hyperbolic, exaggerate in its tone, but by the end, this poem becomes possibly a very strong indictment against a certain view of divinity. Well, and we've seen this before. Also, notice the banker's language, the economic language. We've seen this in a number of prior poems where she'll be playing around, and then finally she'll get to it with Shylock, and a reference, of course, to Merchant of Venice. She begins by asking, what would I give to see his face? Now, there is a reading of this poem that asks, what would I give to see the Lord's face or God's face? And her answer is, well, I'd give my life, of course, because that's what's necessary to see God. And yet she comes back to almost amended. Notice, what would I give to see his face? I give, and then the dash, I give my life. And then the of course already takes us into this area of exaggeration and maybe a tone that's a little tongue-in-cheek. But that is not enough. And again, here, when she says it that way, we begin to wonder, what is she about? And then she'll say, stop just a minute. Let me think. She'll use this same construction in poem 486. It's the only other time she does it. Let me think. And then it's almost like she's coming up. I'd give, we're back to the opening line, I'd give, and then she goes through it. Biggest bobolink, that makes two, him and life, the bobolink, him and life. You know who June is. I give, whoever the you is fascinating here. I give her roses a day from Zanzibar, chosen maybe just for its obscurity, right? And lily tubes like wells. Of course, the stem of the lily is like a well. Bees by the furlong, straits of blue, the blue skies, obviously, that the butterflies sail through. Navies of butterflies sail through, and dappled cowslips dells. In other words, all of the flowers of her father's garden that she loves so much. Then I have shares, notice now the economic language, in primrose banks, daffodil dowries, spicy stocks. Again, obviously, all the economic language here. It's wonderful. Dominions brought as due, bags of doublons, this is its only use in all of her poetry. Adventurous bees, we're back to the bees again, brought me from firmamental seas, and purple from Peru. We're back to poem 73 with that reference. And then notice now. The now is italicized, and it's almost like, have I done enough? Have I argued enough of what I would be willing to sacrifice or to give to see his face, whoever his is? And then all of a sudden, this poem majestically shifts, and Shylock is referenced. This may be the Jew reference, the reference to a Jew in poem 223, and Shylock is only used once and only once here. Go back to our conversation of poem 223, and the question of whether Emily has any kind of anti-Semitic trait of thought. Not a lot has been said on this by scholars because there's just no way to really speculate. But notice the use of Shylock here, and it's almost as if now she's speaking to deity himself, or itself. Notice, now, have I bought it, Shylock? Say, sign me the bond I vow to pay to her who pledges this, pledge back to poem 46, 1 hour of her sovereign's face. Now, much has been made of this use of the word sovereign. Much has been made of the idea that she's talking here maybe about God, maybe about some kind of master. When we get to poem 250, it will be Señor. Sovereign's face, to rhyme with grace. Ecstatic contract, we'll remember ecstatic from poem 125. And then niggard, grace. Now, she'll use this niggardly word one other time in 1326. Stingy or ungenerous, in other words. My kingdom's worth of bliss. The tone, it seems to me, is sharpened here by the suggestion that the only way that one gets to see God for Emily is, of course, to give up all the things of this life, especially the things that she loves. And yet, I think at 2a, you could make the argument that the message here is we'd be willing to give up almost anything to be with the one that we love. Or is that really what's going on at 2b? Is this really an amazing twist of tone? And in the end, this is really an attack on the very idea, the theological notion, that once one dies, then and only then is one able to see God. I think that when we meet poem 769, we're going to come back to this poem, and it reads like this: 1 and 1 are 1, 2 be finished using well enough for schools, but for minor choosing, life just, or death, or the everlasting, more would be too vast for the soul's comprising. Again, the tension here. And then obviously with the mention of Shylock, the Merchant of Venice does come to mind at 3a. Finally, at 3b, who in your life would you be willing to give up for everything? And how do you read this poem? Do you read this as in some ways Emily's attack on the theology that says one must die to gain heaven? Thank you.